That was an obvious question, but how many of you out there don't want to spook deer when it comes to hunting in the hunting season this year? You know, we all don't want to spook deer. Yet what I find is that most of the time our deer habitat improvements, even the way we're hunting public land and the way we're hunting food sources, keeps us from walking in and out of a property and not spooking deer. And so I want to see you not spook deer. And I think it's very important. And what I talk about a lot with food plots, for example, on private land, and obviously when we're talking food plots, we're talking private land, but you can look at that as a food source on public land too. When I'm hunting public land, I'm finding food sources, and that's defining where I hunt and why. It's also keeping me from spooking deer, because the major food sources, deer typically, unless they're nocturnal plots and people are overpressuring them, then those major food sources are going to be hit the last hour of the day. And I can count on not walking through there in the morning because I'm going to spook deer too. So when it comes to not spooking deer on private land, a food plot can really make or break your game plan. Food plots are also, I talk about often, the number one way that you can spook deer on private land. Private land, so many acres are destroyed by a food plot, because once you stick a food plot on a parcel like this one out here and you overhunt it, you walk through it and spook deer, it has a ripple effect for hundreds of yards into your habitat. It's not like deer or mature bucks, oldest bucks in the neighborhood. And mature is all relative. In your area, it might be a 2-year-old buck is the oldest buck in the neighborhood, a 2.5-year-old, you know, maybe a 6-year-old in some areas in Kansas, Iowa, some of the big fantasyland states. And when you get into Wisconsin, Minnesota, where we're at here, it's more in between. 4- and 5-year-olds are really good mature bucks for the area. But bottom line is that if you have a food source that you're spooking, then you're not going to have those deer on most 60, 80, 100 acre parcels, and even a little bit larger, because there's such a ripple effect of those several hundred yards. For once you spook this food, you don't have those deer on your property during the daylight. And if they're not coming onto your property during the daylight, that means they're a half mile away or more. That means they don't get to your land and your food source till the middle of the night. And just with that one food source alone, you can create a situation where you destroy your property. On the flip side, when Dylan, Kevin, Joe, myself are looking at property and we're starting to design that private land parcel, the first thing we look at is a food source. The food source obviously is what sets the table for movement from bedding areas to food source. It sets up those travel corridors, pinch points, funnels. We try to identify locations where you can get in and out, multiple stand locations for multiple winds. That food source is the foundation for the entire movement of a private land parcel. Don't let anyone tell you different. If you just have acorns, hickories, fruit trees, any kind of mast, soft mast, hard mast, whatever it might be, that's not enough to dictate or drive or define a food movement and a deer movement the entire season, because once that food source dries up, you don't have the movement. Deer want consistency. They want something they can look at your property in September, in January, and set that same table of movement. It keeps them safe, but most of all, they want to be stress-free. So obviously the food source sets that foundation of movement, but you know what a food source really does for you in a food plot? A quality food plot on private land is it keeps you from spooking deer. Because once you have that daylight focused food plot, and in this case, we actually widened this year. This is already, I'm gonna guess 2.5 acres. We expanded this to 4 acres. I'll give you an example. You know, just right over here, these two locations right here, this is the woods. We had, Dylan will zoom in later and show you some of the diameter of these trees, but you know, somewhere 4 or 5 inches in diameter that we cut down. This is early successional growth in these locations. This field used to be a hay field out here. It hadn't been planted 18, 19 years. We're actually leaving some of the brush in this edge around here. We don't need this food source to be any bigger than it is right now. It's already really big. It was already the size that we couldn't hunt on it without spooking deer off of it, whether that was a 1/2 acre in size or 2.5 acres like it was. If deer are camping out here in the afternoon, we can't get into stand locations without spooking them right on the food source. So it creates that situation where we want deer to hold here until dark and then release to the neighbors. Now neighbors, it might be up north, might be areas where you have bait piles around you, like in northern Michigan, UP Michigan, where I hunt on public land. Then that whole afternoon or evening destination food source after dark, non-shooting hours, becomes those bait piles. It might be a neighbor's food plot program that creates a nocturnal program, a nocturnal herd, because they're over hunting their food plots. But bottom line is, in this case, we have ag next to us. So we want to hold these deer here and then send them out to the ag after us. And you see where it opens up right behind the power lines there. It's all ag back there, and it's ag all the way to the highway, beyond. And there's a lot of ag in this area. And so that's the true destination food source, meaning that's where the deer are going to camp out all night during dark. We want to hold them on this plot. So what that does for us, this is going to be a daylight parcel. We have the surrounding switchgrass on this side, and then gray dogwood and brush on both sides. It comes to a point back here. It's very thick. The deer are hidden out here. They're not going to spook. What that does for us, we know the deer are going to be camped out here until dark every single day. We have enough food where it holds them until dark, not only every single day starting in September, but it's going to hold them with the diversity that we have all the way until January, February, and most likely even into March, the way we have it right now. So we're not going to lose deer in December going over to a neighbor's getting shot during muzzleloader season. We're going to hold the bulk of the deer. And true, we can't protect all these deer. There's no fences around here. But what we're going to do is protect a high percentage of the bucks. And so I'm QDM minded. And what that means is improved sex ratios, adequate buck age structure, and then populations maintained and balanced with the habitat. You can't have that if you're not holding a deer herd during the daylight. And again, you can't protect them all. You're just protecting as high a percentage of bucks as you can and advancing them to the next age class. And then you're doing everything you can not to put an overbalance of does and fawns on your property. By having this food source here, we know where they're going to be the last hour of daylight every single day. And we also know where they're going to be filtering through as daylight approaches and is just starting every single morning. That means we know that if we walk through this food plot during those hours, that last hour, if we're trying to get out of here just after dark, if we're coming in here just before daylight, we're going to spook deer. What does that do for us then? Not only does it keep us from spooking deer because of the food plot, we go back on this point, 200 yards, we go down in the bottom, we go on the other side into a water hole that we have, bedding area on the other side around this bowl, then we know that we can get into those stands in the morning and have defined morning stands because deer aren't there. So it keeps us from spooking deer not only in the afternoon when we're getting in and out of our stands because we know where they're at, but we also know where they're not, whether it's we want to come through here at 11 o'clock in the morning. We know deer aren't going to be here. They're going to be back in their bedding areas. We want to come here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to go for a sit and it's getting dark at 6. We know they're not out here. We're not going to spook deer. Likewise, if we want to get into some of their bedding areas before light in the morning, we know they're there. And at the same time, if I go back into a bedding area at 3 o'clock, I know they're there. I hope that makes sense. Because of this food source, it determines where deer are going to be at particular times of the day, especially and in particular when we make this a daylight food source. That sets the assemblage and the foundation of everything we look at in a parcel for deer hunting, the entire deer hunting strategy. That's what that food plot does, like nothing else. I talk about mock scrapes as being the greatest deer habitat, deer hunting attraction to a small spot right in front of a stand location. That's so true for that little defined area. Any buck that's walking through will visit that mock scrape when it walks by. That's why I have a mock scrape at every stand location. No more, no less. I don't want to attract deer to a spot that I'm not hunting. So camera, mock scrape, stand location, all three go right together in that spot. However, those mature bucks that are cruising through to hit that mock scrape aren't going to be there in the first place if we don't have that foundation of food on the property. That's why timber stand improvement, working on your timber, producing more oaks, producing more apples, that's not going to maintain chestnuts. They're not going to maintain a deer herd and produce that QDM herd, allow you to create a great herd and a great hunt the entire season, because unless you have that quality food plot on private land, you're not going to have that deer herd captive during the daylight to pay attention on your land. Let's face it, it sounds easy. Put a great food plot in, make it highly attractive. In this case, we're gonna have corn on the at least 2 acre chunk right up here, 2.5 acres. Then on this back, 1.5 to 2 acres, we'll have greens. On one side, I'll have a mix of peas, beans, late planted, meaning around August 1st. I'm gonna even put some buckwheat in that mix right there. I'm gonna take out the oats this year. On the other side, I'll have a brassica blend. Might even add tillage radish beans and peas on the one side, and then brassica blend on this side. But bottom line is we're gonna have 2 green leafy plantings back here. We'll have the corn up there. And what we find a lot, especially in these ag areas, they leave the corn alone until about November, December. And so we're just setting this food plot up for enough diversity, variety, and volume so that it lasts for the entire season. That gives us the foundation that we have, that we need for this area, and that supports this entire area. We can even go over to the 38 acres over there. It's on the other side. This is a 67 acre chunk. We own the 38 over there. That's in combination with this. We have about 1.5 acres of green there, and then we have a 1 acre area of corn back here that we talked about in another video. It's about, I would say, 700 yards as crow flies, 600 yards as crow flies from here. So what we're doing is we're adding enough green, enough corn, and diversity of green so that we can actually set that foundation of not only attraction, not only morning stands, not only evening stands, not only that entire daylight movement from the area. Because again, deer don't move that far during the daylight. If you try to control their nighttime movements, you're gonna have an impossible task, because 90% of their entire movement is after dark. If a buck has a 3-mile home range, almost all of that is after dark. He can end up anywhere. And sure, during the daylight, he might end up anywhere, but the majority of the time, he's only moving 200 to 300 yards during the daylight. When we have these food sources, when we have these bedding areas, when we have all that definition, then bottom line is, that keeps us from spooking deer. Keeps us from spooking deer when we go in the morning, when we come out after dark, when we go in at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, when we're coming out of stands in the morning, when we're going into stands at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It keeps us from spooking deer, and that keeps the entire foundation of movement intact. That's what we try to work with our clients. That's the entire focus of this channel, is not only to teach you how to hunt, what days to pick, the hunting strategies, how to get on and off your land, but how to build a parcel. And let's take this and apply it to public land. Most of my teachings, most of what I've learned in my experience is born out of the roots of public land hunting. Hunting public land, you're doing the same thing, only the difference is the food source is always changing. It's always moving around, so you have to be on top of your food sources, know what they are, or you're hunting funnels, escape routes, but it's the entire system. If you know the food's there and it's unpressured, you know they're going to bed here. That means you need to hunt here in the morning, here in the evening, somewhere in between during the daylight for all day cruising. Sets up that entire foundation. But again, most importantly, it keeps you from spooking deer. If you can set your property up, make it highly attractive, and you keep from spooking deer, you get to experience a true 5% parcel, meaning that less than 5% of all deer parcels, and I would venture to guess that it's less than 3% of all hunters and private landowners get to experience that type of hunt. I want you to experience. That's why we keep putting this content out, and I hope you like the progression of this food plot out here. This is pretty cool. We have our redneck blind where we can sneak in. That's all switchgrass along the entire power line back there. We'll have 2.5 acres of corn up there. We'll be able to get into that redneck, watch this whole thing with a gun, but then that sets up all our bow stands out here. Almost all our stands and blind locations are bow related, whether they're rednecks or not. This is one of the few where we wouldn't hunt with a bow, but all our bow stands right here are built because of this foundation of food. We won't spook deer, and we'll try to bring it to you this fall because it's gonna be awesome out here. It was fun last year. Dante shot a buck out here. We had almost every buck, including Venti here. Bow is another one we're gonna watch this year, 45. A lot of deer out here. We'll bring it to you this fall. Folks, I wanna make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to 93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.